guys, it's Mrs. Freeman, and this is lesson 9.7. Still talking about scientific notation, but we're going to do some operations with scientific notation. So go ahead and label your notes page real quick. And then for your warm-up today, I want you to tell whether or not these four numbers are in scientific notation. Yes or no, and tell me why not if they're not. Okay, go ahead and pause the video here if you need more time. But remember that our two rules were, one, that my first number or my factor has to be between 1 and 10. And then also I have to have 10 to some integer exponent. And an integer means that it's going to be a positive or a negative, but it's not going to be a fraction or a decimal. Okay, so if you look at number 1 here, I do have a factor that's between 1 and 10, and I do have 10 to an integer, so this would be in scientific notation. There's nothing wrong with it. It is yes. Number 2, I do have 10 to an integer, but my factor here is less than 1, and it needs to be between 1 and 10. So this would not be in scientific notation because 0.12 is not between 1 and 10. Okay, number 3, I do have a factor between 1 and 10. But I do not have 10 to an integer. I have 10 to a decimal. So this is not in scientific notation because I have 10, we'll say because I don't have 10 to an integer power. Okay, and then number 4, I do have 10 to an integer power, not a fraction or a decimal, but this factor here is bigger than 10, so this is also no, and that's because 12.94 is not between 1 and 10. All right, so that is just a quick review of, this is what we would have done in 9.5. We talked about how a number had to look to be in scientific notation. Okay, so we've done a lot of work with scientific notation now. What we're going to do today is we're going to multiply or divide numbers written in scientific notation. So to do that, the rule is we're going to multiply or divide the factors, which is the number in the front, and the powers of 10 separately. Okay, I'm going to circle that word separately. So let's look at one of these. It says find 3 times 10 to the negative 5th times 5 times 10 to the negative 2. So I am multiplying 3 times 10 to the negative 5th and 5 times 10 to the negative 2. The reason that I'm going to do these separately is because this is a product rule. I'm multiplying. And if I'm solving a problem using the product rule, that means if I have exponents with the same base, I add those exponents. And negative 5 plus negative 2 is negative 7. So that is how I would take care of this part. Okay, it said to do the factors and the powers of 10 separately. The powers of 10, I have 2 powers with the same base, they're both 10, being multiplied. So I just have to add their exponents. Okay, so that took care of that part. Now if I look at the factors, 3 times 5, that's 15. So I have 15 times 10 to the negative 7th, which is super close but not quite because that's not in scientific notation. Because 15 times 10 to the negative 7th, 15 is not between 1 and 10, so it's a little bit too big. So what I have to do is make this be in scientific notation by turning this into a decimal that would work there. 1.5 would work there because 1.5 is between 1 and 10. So what I did was I moved this decimal one place. So I'm still going to have this times 10, but instead of the -7, because I moved it one place, I'm going to add 1 to that. And that's going to give me 1.5 times 10 to the -6. Okay, so that is how this works. Now, you learned, or you would have learned if you were in class, how to do this on the calculator. And if you have not learned, I'm going to show you how to do it on a calculator. On your state test, you are going to be given a calculator. It's called the TI 30XS. And on that TI 30XS, there is a mode button. It says mode on it. And if you click that button that says mode, you're going to see the letters NORM. They're probably selected because that means normal. That means when you type a problem into your calculator, it's going to give you a normal answer. But next to that normal is the letters SCI. And if I want an answer in scientific notation like this one, then I'm going to select that SCI. So if you have a TI 30XS, somehow hit mode and make sure you have SCI selected. Now that you have SCI selected, you can just type this in the calculator, okay? I did show you how to do it by hand, but in all reality, you're going to have this calculator on the test, so I want to make this as easy for you as possible. You're going to have this calculator literally for the rest of your math career, so if you learn how to use it, your life's going to be easier. If you do not have a TI 30XS at home, you can Google scientific notation calculator. Scientific notation calculator. And you will be able to find one of those pretty easily. So you absolutely can use a calculator for this, but I want you to know how to get into this scientific notation mode. So please be sure to ask me if you're not sure, or ask Mrs. Denton if you're not sure, because we can't answer your calculator questions on test day. Okay, we can answer them now, but we can't answer them when the state test comes around. So you need to know how to do this before we get there. Okay, so with me telling you that you can use a calculator, do this next example. 2 times 10 to the -4th times 6 times 10 to the -3rd in your calculator. When you put that in your calculator, you should get 1.2 times 10 to the -6. Okay, so let's see what happens if I do this by hand. If I don't have my calculator, if I need to do this by hand, I just need to follow my product rule rules, and I need to do these separately. So 6 times 2 are my factors. If I do that separately, that's just 12. And then for my powers of 10, I have 2 powers that have the same base that are being multiplied. So I just add their exponents. And -4 plus -3 is -7. So my answer here is 12 times 10 to the -7th. But that can't be my final answer because 12 is bigger than 10. And my factor has to be between 1 and 10. So that's where the 1.2 comes from. And because I moved this decimal place over once, that means I would have to add 1 to this decimal, making it a -6. Okay, so you will get that in the calculator. I absolutely want you to use the calculator, but you have to know how to use it. It's a lot of buttons. You have to know how to use it. You have to be really familiar with it. So ask now if you need help. Okay, example 2, we're dividing. Find 1.5 times 10 to the -8th divided by 6 times 10 to the -7th. So I would do this the same way. I would look at these separately. I would look at my factors, and I would look at my powers of 10. I'm dividing my powers of 10, which means I'm going to subtract my exponents. Doing this the same way as we did multiplication, except we're using the quotient rule instead of the product rule. But you are given a calculator, and you can use the calculator. But with division, there is something you need to know. There is 2 ways you can type in division. One of them is using the fraction button. That's why this looks like this. That will totally work. If you type in this right here, 1.5 times 10 to the -8th divided by 6 times 10 to the 7th. This is not going to give you the correct answer because what this reads here, if it follows the order of operations, it's going to take this first number here and it's just going to divide 6. Okay, but it's not supposed to just divide 6. It's supposed to divide this entire thing. So you have 2 ways of typing this in. You can either type it in as a fraction, or you can type in both of these in parentheses. Divided by 6 times 10 to the 7th. Either way, you're going to get the same answer. Try them both on your calculator and make sure you do get the same answer, but you may use the fraction button, or you may type parentheses and the divided by sign. It doesn't matter which one you use, you're going to get the same thing, but make sure you do not do this one. No. Okay, and this one was the one without parentheses. I wrote those in to explain, but you can type it with parentheses. You can't type it without parentheses, just like this right here. This is good. Without parentheses is bad because that is just dividing the 6 and not the times 10 to the 7th. Okay, so if you type this in your calculator, I'm going to type it in mine as well. I've got 1.5 times 10 to the -8. And I'm dividing 6 times 10 to the 7th. And that should give you a really big decimal. I've got 2.5 times 10 to the -16th here. So if I were to type this in my calculator and I didn't have it in scientific notation mode, it would give me a really, really, really ugly decimal. It would be 15 zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and then 2, 5. Okay, this is why scientific notation is useful, because writing this out every time would be ridiculous. So writing this is a lot more feasible. Okay, I want you to try this one in your calculator on your own. Go ahead and pause this video while you do that, and then we'll come back and do it together. Alright, so if you type this one in your calculator just like it looks, remember you can either type it in using the fraction button, or you could type it in using the division button, but you have to put both of these things in parentheses if you do it that way. So if you did it correctly, you should have got 1.325 times 10 to the 11th. If you got that right, good job. If not, I want you to try again until you do get that. figure out what you're doing wrong. If you can't figure it out, send me an email and I'll try to figure it out for you. With you, I should say. All right, example 3 says, how many times greater is the diameter of the sun than the diameter of Earth? All right, so they're giving me this diameter of Earth in scientific notation, but they're giving me the diameter of the sun in standard form. And I want to know how many times greater the sun is, this is the sun, than the Earth. So if you think of this in smaller numbers, if I had, let's say that Bill had 10 candy bars and Susie had 2 candy bars, and I wanted to know how many times greater Bill's candy stash was than Susie's, then what would I do with those two numbers? I would divide them, right? Because that would give me a 5, and that would tell me that Bill's candy stash is 5 times bigger than Susie's candy stash. So that's what we're doing here. Sometimes if you make it with, think of it with smaller numbers this way, then it makes it a little bit easier to figure out what operation you're using. Because if you just read the question, sometimes it can lead you astray. Because that says, right here, the word times. And that makes you think you're multiplying, but you're actually not, because it says how many times greater is this one than this one. So I'm actually dividing. And I want to know how many times greater the sun is. The sun is 1,400,000 kilometers. Then the Earth, and the Earth is 1.28 times 10 to the 4th kilometers. Now, I could go ahead and convert the sun to scientific notation and then divide them, but you don't have to, because the calculator is going to do all that for you as long as you have it set in scientific notation mode. Okay, now it doesn't tell me which way to put my answer. It doesn't tell me whether to state my answer in standard form or scientific notation, so we're going to do it in both, because why not? So if I type in this problem here, 1,400,000. And I divide it by, remember, either use your fraction button or put this in parentheses, 1.28 times 10 to the 4th. That gives me 1.09375 times 10 to the 2nd. Okay, pause this video if you need to until you get that answer, because I don't want you to move on until you get that answer. 1.28 times 10 to the 4th. On the bottom, with parentheses if you're not using the fraction button. And that's going to be 1.09375 times 10 to the 2nd. That is my answer in scientific notation, right? Scientific notation. But what if I want my answer in standard form? Well, then I'm going to turn my calculator back to normal mode. And I'm going to type in the same thing, or I'm just going to hit enter on the 1.09375 times 10 squared, and it'll give it to me. And that's going to be 109.375. Okay, so the sun is about 109 times bigger. In diameter, of course, because that's what we were measuring, than the Earth. Cool. So anytime you see that how many times, that's telling you you're going to divide. I know it seems weird because of that word times, but just think back to Bill and Susie's candy stashes. Okay, my last slide here is the diameter of the moon now is about 3.48 times 10 to the 3rd kilometers. Using the information in our last example, how many times greater is the diameter of the sun than the diameter of the moon? So I'm going to go ahead and go back here. Remember, the diameter of the sun was 1,400,000. And I want to know how many times greater that is than the moon. So remember what this how many times greater means. And I want you to try this one on your own. Pause this video while you do that. And then we will do it together. Alrighty, so that how many times greater is telling us that we're going to divide the sun by the moon here. And when you do that in your calculator, depending on your calculator, it might round a little bit differently, but you should have got something pretty close to 4.02 times 10 to the second. Which is the same as 402, okay? It does have a lot of decimal places behind it. It'd be like 402.29885, blah, 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 blah. But we're just going to round because this isn't very useful to us. So in my answer, I'm going to say that the moon, or sorry, the sun is the bigger one, is about, because I'm saying that word about, then not rounding or not including the decimal point is okay. It's about 402 times bigger than the sun. Then the moon, I keep saying the wrong word, sorry. Then the moon. And that was in diameter. Okay, so notice that my Earth was 109 times smaller than the moon, and I just said the wrong word again. My Earth was 109 times smaller than the sun, sorry, and my moon is 402 times smaller than the sun. So that means that my Earth is bigger than the moon, and we know that that's true. So that's a good way to check your answer there. Okay, so that's all for today. Yes, you may use your calculator, okay? It's not cheating. You're going to get one on the state test. I want you to know how to use it, but I'm just going to reiterate this again and again. I cannot help you use it on state testing day. So you have to be familiar with how to use it now, okay? If you're a virtual student, I'm going to write that down again. The calculator is called TI30XS. Some of you may have it already, some of you may not. It's $15 on Amazon. You will be given one on your state test. It'll be on the computer screen, so you'll click the buttons with your mouse. The reason that I suggest buying your own is A, you can use it on the test. As long as you let me clear the memory before, you can use it. And B, you'll know where all the buttons are. Because I don't want you to go into the test and be like, oh, I don't know how to do that on this calculator. So if you have your own beforehand, then you'll be ready to go on that day. But I'd be happy to answer any questions you have up until then. I just can't answer them on the test. Okay, $15 on Amazon if you're interested. It is optional. But you will use this in high school as well. So it is a smart idea to go ahead and get one. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. Go ahead and get on your assignment. Have a great day.